Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be continuing on with, I'm getting close to the end of my long run of videos looking one issue at a time at the complete 8-ball, the new softcover release of this from Fantagraphics. I've really been enjoying it as we've been getting into these later issues. So really glad that I pushed through and you pushed through with me. We'll be looking at 8-ball number 16 today. Now, more pages, higher quality, and more expensive by Daniel Gillespie Clowes. And I think this painted style here on this cover is so different than everything else. But the absurdity of like this giant sperm, whatever this is they've pulled out, I really just the absurdity of that. I think that's my favorite cover so far. I know it's probably not the most iconic one, but something about the look of that just cracks me up. Inside we have something, I'm not quite sure I understand what he's doing with Squirrel Girl in Candy Pants. It feels like he's making fun of Ghost World with these characters. It's the same, like two young kids running around talking shit about everybody. So I think that's what that is. There's a lot of self-criticism in these later issues. This one here, like a Weed Joe, this is another one that I'm familiar with from the caricature collection that I have, as is the story Character, which also in this issue. So I'm familiar with this, but I haven't read it in a while, and I really do think I'm going to be able to get rid of the character book from what it looks like. But here, I think this is another one of those Clowes looking inwards. He's kind of he has the outsider character in here, that there's a bit of a sympathetic view to him, but there's also a bit of a critical view. Here he says this statement that kind of struck me. The secret to being alone is to organize your time to develop habits and routines and gradually elevate their importance to where they seem almost like normal, healthy activities. And I've definitely done that and continue to do that. There was a point in my life where I had like I can kind of turn anything into work. Like obviously I've turned reading comics into work by doing this channel. And I used to do that with like reading comics still was like, like research in my mind, even though it's something I wanted to do. Reading philosophy was like I had this crazy idea that I was going to read the entire history of all the important philosophers' complete works, which is insane. I got up I got up to the beginning of modernism, Spinoza, and I was like, okay, I'm out of energy for that after 15 years. It's really hard to make it through the medievals in any amount of time, but it's that kind of thing. That is the secret to being alone. And you make these things like work and over important and routine, and it's not good to do that though. And really it just turns you into a misanthrope. And I know a lot of us are introverted by nature and misanthropic a little bit by nature, but that's only going to reinforce it. And I think he's picking at that there. There's some more instances here in stories of like regretting being an asshole or just like generalizing about people. So here he's just saying old fossils. He's calling old people fossils. And the next day he's like immediately, if I could erase one thing from my life, it would be that old fossils comment. Well, okay, this is obviously him looking back from a long time ago. He's also been trying to leave a message for a little girl, telling her I love you, and by the end of the story she leaves a message, or she's leaving messages, but they get washed away, and you can really kind of read them even though the characters can't. It's like, what is wrong with you? So that's this sad little thing. There's also this kind of ongoing criticism of the irony of the Gen X. Here he's talking about going to see this crappy little magic show, and he says, I was mesmerized by the threadbare earnestness, the beautiful tragedy of the whole thing. I could barely contain my immense feelings of love and goodwill for every performer. And that's a non-ironic thing, right? Like, you're not sitting there going, I know I'm not supposed to like this, but I'm going to choose to anyways, even kind of just as a joke. Like, this is really earnest. It's like, I don't know, it's not that great, but there really is something special about contributing to the thing, like in the same way that comics, you're more invested, you're contributing in between the panels in a way that when you're watching like a CGI movie, you're not doing as much. And there's something earnest about that, and him talking about the earnest beauty of it, and the lamenting the tragedy of it. I think that's like a better, mature way to grapple with liking something that you kind of feel like you shouldn't. Here, there's a scene where like the kid kills a bird and he regrets killing the bird, so it's kind of this regret about lashing out. That actually happened to me. I got a BB gun when I was like 6, and immediately I went out and shot a blue jay, and then after the kind of the intensity of like a kid not thinking because he's excited about a new toy went away, I felt so much regret and sorrow that they killed an animal. I was weeping to my parents. So I know what that is. And again, this theme of regret keeps coming up for me. And then here he's saying, I went to a new school where I struggled to be thought of as someone who housed a vital and complicated inner world. And I think there's a bit of honesty in that from Clowes as well, that when you're putting out stories like this, lashing out against or critiquing everyone, there is this sense of like, I'm smarter than everyone. I have the vital inner world, but they're all a bunch of dummies and schlubs. And admitting that that's a bit of a fantasy that he had, I think, is a brave moment. Then we get a fun little thing here where Enid and Becca are selling what is obviously a real world CD for a friend of Clowes or somebody, Neil Smythe, and Velvet Glove. I guess Velvet Glove must be in reaction to 8-Ball. I also noticed cartoonist Andy Hartsnell wrote a letter in here. I always really like seeing who all was influenced. And I don't know timelines on everyone's career, so I don't know how much of this is fan letters from someone who will be a cartoonist and fan letters from people who are already cartoonists. But I always like catching those names. Then you get this MCMLXVI. Don't ask me to translate that to an actual number. But he must be talking about 1966 because that's what the story is about. And just a little bit of nostalgia in there for like the world when it was a better place. I'm not too into that kind of story, and there didn't seem to be as much self-reflection in it for me. Really do like this art style that he does with watercolors or markers or whatever it is, though. That's something I would really like to understand how he's doing it. Again, probably need to get that artist edition, which I'm sure is a bajillion dollars. Then we go back to Ghost World, the infamous one that came in with this wrong color printed. I think it's fun that they didn't fix that because they were committed to collecting the facsimile editions. He's just chosen to be like, well, the world spoke, and that episode of Ghost World is supposed to be in this eye-searing, like yellow-orange color. But it really does kind of add to me, this feels better. I don't know where the characters are supposed to be located, but this makes it feel like Southern California to me. Or I know he was in Berkeley at this time, so this feels Berkeley-ish to me with this light and kind of the lower buildings and diners and things. I didn't take much away from the content of this episode of 8-Ball, to be honest. It just seemed to kind of, I don't know, it seemed more like an atmosphere piece to me. Maybe I'll see, like, as I read more of them, what it was about. Then this piece here, Immortal Invisible, this is another one that I've read before in the caricature book, where you have this kid walking around, again, the outsider, the strange adolescent who's trying to figure out something about the world through generalizing, and that kind of undoes him a little bit. So that same thematic thing that I keep talking about. But I found some things in here that I quite liked. One, just from an art standpoint, is I really like seeing Clowes on dry brush right here. He's such a slick artist. To see him go into this rougher mode for a second is really nice, and I'm a bit sad that there's not more of that in his work, because he really kills it on the trees in this episode. It has that Craig Thompson kind of blutch vibe to it, which is really nice, and like contrasting that against his slickness works really well. To have the, like, not doing a whole story that way, but have those two things together is really nice. There's a scene here where he says, my mother did a very bad job of raising me. I don't know how autobiographical that is, but that's the pretty 90s, idea of psychology. The parents fucked everybody up. Here he talks about, instead of culminating in a repudiation of non-Christian beliefs, she even-handedly recapitulated the major religions and held, while each had its own merits, none was really worth a damn. And there's a sense of like even-handedness to everyone creeping into that. There's these statements like this that keep really engage me with the later Clowes stuff, where it really seems like he's he's struggling to get somewhere from where he was, and those two parts of him keep battling out, and I really enjoy watching that. And so statements like that just show the new thing creeping in, the new awareness. As this character goes around and is trying to piece together a story about the world through all these interactions he's starting to realize things. And he says, maybe what I really wanted, I began to think, was a stronger sense of fellowship. So instead of lashing out at everyone and critiquing everyone and trying to set yourself apart as the unique one, the one who's, has this extra thing to say, who's this special person that was hinted at in the earlier story, it's like, maybe it's about fellowship. Maybe it is about other people and friends and relationships, and that he's going through kind of doing a factual breakdown about everything. And this is something I'm kind of struggling with too, so maybe I'm mapping it on, like, where's the difference between facts and stories and how they impact our life. And obviously stories don't have that factual nature to them. So you just have to kind of choose, and I don't mean it necessarily in a religious sense, but there's some, like, I know this isn't scientifically accurate, but I find it helpful, and so I can have some faith in that. Or even just like personally, like, you can make up your own little narratives about what's going on in your life that you've kind of pieced through, and that maybe that criticism that has dissolved the glue of society and our ability to form identity and stuff like that, is because we've attached the idea of faith entirely to religious stuff. And so there's something here about this stronger sense of fellowship, that this character is like looking for the glue a little bit, but still, I don't think by the story quite finding that thing. Here, there's also this moment where you have the youth and the adults come together. At that moment, I remember thinking wistfully about a bygone era where men and friendships were honorable. I became so fixated on this thought that I was only partially aware of the alcoholic's sermon being delivered before me. There's no goddamn respect anymore, the subject of today's kids. And it's this eternal struggle between the youth and the adults that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And society seems to be stuck in this struggle between the temptation towards childish behavior, and like the only way it's going to get better is if we all like take on the responsibility of adults. But it's like a game theory thing. That a majority of people are going to still be irresponsible, selfish children, and so it's harder and harder to get more people to sign up to take on burdens and be a responsible adult. And like he's playing with that in there, I think, too, and that the adults lose the sense of what the open-mindedness of a kid's bringing to it. So he's just nuancing everything a lot more in these stories. Or maybe I'm just mapping on all of the things I'm thinking about. But the fact that he creates an open enough map is good than that. But then, he swerved back into the judgmental, she doesn't like me, she must just be a lesbian kind of thing. And that's just, that I don't think anymore that's a struggle in Clowes. I think it's a representation of his more accurate perception of the world, that there are these things battling each other, these kind of things going on in people's heads, and he's representing that. And then his last little stop here is, I made one more stop. A sleepy bachelor in a basement apartment graciously emptied the dregs of his bowl of spearmint gumdrops into his bag. And he calls that a neutral closing. It was like, this guy's kind of removed and hasn't given me any answers that I'm looking for. And then he just kind of puts all the candy away. So I don't know totally what I think that one, or what this issue thematically is all about, but it still seems to be that struggle in Clowes that I've seen in other issues. And then this didn't add much understanding to me, other than kind of somehow doing a second Ghost World, but trying to poke fun at it, but really just doing the exact same thing. I didn't know what that was about. And then you have just like some little cutout stuff on the back here where you can order back issues of 8-Ball, and the models are modeling them, which is kind of a fun thing. So that was issue 16. I only have 2 issues to go. Again, I'm finding it more nuanced, more interesting as I go. So thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Really appreciate it. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel, the 2 best ways to support us are, first, through our Patreon. All of the money we get on there helps us buy the books that we review, so we're trying to put it right back into the community. There's a couple different tiers of interaction, so you can get some exclusive content, some voting rights, things like that. And then the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll take a look at one of his projects now. Solid Yellow, Path of the Shades by Clarence Doss is a really cool ongoing project that Living the Line will be producing. Clarence is a PhD student from Fiji who's studying the myths of Fiji for his doctoral thesis. And part of that study project is that he's producing these comics. They're kind of like Hellboy, where there's these little short stories that capture all of these different mythologies. But then he's using that to wrap the project into his doctoral thesis and then provide educational material where people can come to these comics. You know, they don't have to read his PhD thesis. They can come to the comics and get a more consumable version of the mythology of Fiji. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.